we've got quite the race on our hands for third place. I don't know if we can bring the table up really quickly right now and just run through it. Obviously, we know Forge and Atletico Ottawa leading the pack way out in front. They are in a battle for the CPL Shield, 3 points separating them. They've both clinched their playoff spot, but just below that, well, not just below, it's 13 points below that. Cavalry, 33 points. Halifax, 32 points. York United, 32 points. This is a really, really fascinating battle for me, at least at the moment. We saw Cavalry beat Forge last week and then just get played off the pitch by York this week, who again make that race very close, which they needed to do after they lost to Halifax. Mitch, we'll come back to you here. How maybe you can help us, just explain why it's so important for these three teams to be fighting for that third place spot, and how big a battle this really is.
Well, I think it's pretty significant. I mean, first and foremost, if you are able to get past that 4-5 knockout game, you don't have to play midweek right to start your playoff, life. And we know how much of a challenge that is in terms of travel, in terms of obviously fitness, just coming off the playoffs. You would host that game if you finish fourth, or you'd have to play on the road if you finish fifth. So that's already something that skipping that is a huge step. And then, you get to host a game that next weekend. You get that week to prepare. You get to sit back and watch that Wednesday game and maybe get a little bit more of an idea of, what you can expect from your opponent, having seen them in a playoff game. That's an advantage. And also this year, you probably have your schedule a little more locked in. We're assuming at this point, you're probably going to Ontario for the rest of the playoffs, considering how things stand. So I think it just gives so much of an advantage for whatever team that finishes third. And, we've certainly seen that over the years play out. And I think that that's really why we're seeing these entertaining games between these clubs is, no one wants to be that fifth place finisher because it is such a challenge, such an uphill battle if you finish fifth, and third just gives you that, monumentous edge in terms of trying to get to that final.
Yeah, it really does. I think we've got a bracket here that we can put up just to remind everybody who maybe is coming to this for the first time or doesn't remember it from last year. This is our playoff format in the Canadian Premier League for the last few years. First place and will host second place in that first game not the first game of the playoffs, but it'll be on the first weekend in the championship semifinal, the winner of which goes to directly host the CPL final. And they get a full weekend off in between. So there's a huge advantage to winning that game. Second place, obviously the only other team with a chance of hosting the final. Cavalry, we saw finish second last year, beat Forge in that first game, and we saw how important it was to them to host and then win that final. Third place team, meanwhile, they come down into that second half of the bracket, really, where they'll host the winner of that midweek fourth versus fifth knockout match. And then the winner of that goes on to play at the losing team of that first championship semifinal between either first or second. And that's your other route into the CPL final. It's really not that complicated when you look at it, laid out like that. Sometimes we can talk in circles around the benefits and things like that, but it is important. But back to this race at hand, AGR, Cavalry, Halifax, York. Which of these teams, I guess I'll put you on a spot here, do you feel most confident in the last 6 weeks? And which of them do you think has the best chance to come out in third place?
I mean, each team, it's been a strange stretch, right? Because you mentioned Halifax a while ago, we're looking kind of a bit, down, right? They hadn't had the busiest of transfer windows. They weren't in the greatest forms. And then they go out and, get back-to-back huge wins at home. But then now you lose this weekend, granted to Forge, but still Halifax, all of a sudden there's some life there. York, all season long, they've done a great job of kind of recovering from the earlier start and have just been quite consistent over the last few weeks to pick up a huge win over Cavalry. But then it's Cavalry we forget. Well, you don't forget, but you do almost forget at this stage of the season. They're the North Star Cup winners. They're the team with the pedigree. They're the team that loaded up this window. They've had a few good performances before. So it's tough because each of the three, it honestly might depend on the week that you asked, what form they're in. So I'm just going to go on reputation. I look at Cavalry. It's kind of theirs to play from the front. I think
Yeah.
for York and Halifax, they shouldn't take that as a slight or any of the sorts. Ultimately, I think that's a fair way to gauge the race, that Cavalry, with their experience, with the moves they made, with the players they have, and, considering the injuries they've dealt with this year, I look at Cavalry and I expect them to fully lock in and turn it up this fall. That's what champions do. So I'm going to have them play favorites. But I think it's fascinating that York, Halifax, Cavalry have all kind of beat each other at different points this year. And I think York in particular, the way they're built, they seem like the team you'd want to avoid most in the playoffs. So if they can find a way to sneak in a third, that would increase their odds significantly, because like you mentioned, that 4v5 playoff is a nightmare for many reasons, because even if you host it, that's it for the playoffs, you're done, and you're traveling the next. I'll always remember when, like, it was 2 years ago, where Pacific had to host the 4v5, they won it, and then they had to travel to Halifax. Of course they won that. It's a bit of a special 2-game run from them,
but
that
it was
not fun
grueling.
for them.
That was a tough few days of travel for them. They did not enjoy that. AJ, would your answer change if Halifax beat Cavalry this weekend, and then Cavalry have lost to both of their two, rivals in this race in back-to-back weeks?
Absolutely. I think the alarm bells would ring, and that's where I say it's so close that, again, you could talk to me next week if Halifax wins and all of a sudden Cavalry's not looking great. That's why I'm going with Cavalry with the edge, because it's hard to see a world where they let that happen, but that's the fun nature of this. Champions can also be dethroned, and there's room for new teams to step up. And I think that's where Halifax and York, it feels like those two have the most to prove, right? Because York's slowly been building, and then Halifax, of course, missed the playoffs last year, whereas Cavalry's kind of always been in that top 3 mix in their existence. So seeing them in any other position but would look like a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Cavalry certainly had the highest expectations coming into the season. Mitch, I'll let you give your pick as well on who's coming top 3, but also, obviously nobody wants it to finish 5th and go through that gauntlet. But of these 3 teams, is there one that you feel would be best suited to running that gauntlet and might have the best chance at going a couple of rounds if they did finish 5th? I think there's a right answer here.
What? Why do you gotta make me the bad cop? But the team that that's tough, because I think they all have kind of advantages. I'll eliminate Halifax just because Halifax has always struggled on the road, and that's kind of been the case again this year. They've been probably the best they've ever been on the road, but that's still not highest. I think it's York, though. I think York have kind of this plucky underdog style that would make them so difficult for whoever they're going to play in the playoffs. Like, it's going to be an absolute battle, and they love it that way. They're going to get stuck in. They're going to get under your skin. Like, I'm so excited for whoever York play in the playoffs, and how many rounds they play, because I think that game is going to be must watch for sure. So what was the other question, though?
Your pick for third.
Pick for third.
Would
right.
you also pick Cavalry for third?
I think so, probably. I think, again, you talked about the last 6 weeks, but it's kind of the past 6 years. Like, this is a club that knows what it takes to win those key regular season games. Now, with that being said, it's been just such a weird race. Like, look just this past week, like just this York Cavalry game, where Cavalry comes in after their best ever game of the season. It seems like, when they beat Forge. York are coming off their worst game of the season, where they lose to Halifax, and they do the inverse this weekend, where Cavalry probably plays their worst game and York plays one of their best. So again, it's probably going to change week to week, but that's what we want, don't we? We want it to be where we can't really call it until the last day, and that's what it's kind of looking like. And also, these are 3 great teams. Like, whatever order they end up in, like, it doesn't feel like someone's limping into the playoffs of these 3 at the moment, which is super exciting and going to make these playoff battles that much more entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, it is fun to know that, whatever order these 3 finish in, probably, again, there's like, anything could happen. Pacific, Vancouver, technically not Vancouver, they're officially eliminated, but Pacific, you could find a way in there if somebody were to collapse. Unlikely at this point that Atletico Ottawa collapse enough for somebody to pass them. So I think it's these 3, but it's exciting to know that they're going to play each other in the playoffs. I will say that I think my thoughts on Halifax will change wildly based on whether or not Thiago Coimbra is available in the next few weeks. That's a huge storyline to watch. Didn't play this week against Forge. Still not sure. Patrice Geyser didn't seem particularly concerned that he's going to be out long term. He kind of implied it was more of a kind of game week decision situation to keep him away from Hamilton. If he's out for a significant amount of time, though, that's a problem for the Wanderers. And just finally on York, Mitch, I absolutely agree that they're the toughest out, I think, as the fifth place team. If they were to be that, I think they're the most likely to be willing to go on the road anywhere and just be willing to make it ugly, right? Just make it a slog for the home team, just get in their faces, just make it, a really tough, aggressive, real cup game. So I think that would be very exciting. However, York obviously don't want that.